The Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created, people, together with animals and creeping things, and birds of the air, for I am sorry I have made them. But Noah found favor in the sight of God. And after the year-long event, as near as we can tell, of building an ark, having the rains come, living in the ark with all the creatures gathered therein, and then the long period of time it took for the earth to dry up. After that period of time, Noah and all of the creatures left the ark, and Noah built an altar to the ark, to the Lord, and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing odor, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of humankind, for the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth. Nor will I ever again destroy every living creature as I have done. We are particularly conscious this weekend of just how powerful are the metaphors of light and darkness, as one way or another we will all revisit the primordial human experience of a total eclipse. In its way, the biblical literature is a prismatic event, for it makes spiritual light visible to us, even as it mirrors the spiritual light and darkness of the human story, and even as it measures the spiritual darkness and light of our own personal stories. Scripture opens us to the presence of light, the presence of spirit in history. And Scripture mirrors humanity's struggle to fulfill the highest impulses of our spiritual nature. We read Scripture, Scripture reads us. Reverend Chris's sermon a few weeks ago underscored the fact that it took 5 chapters for Joseph to agonizingly work through his decision to forgive his brothers for selling him into slavery. And in the process, as she reconnected all of us with our own experiences of our personal difficulties in moving to forgiveness in our own lives, she helped us see that Scripture reminds us to trust the benefits of so doing. Spiritual life helps us see how to move to meaning in our own lives, how to make decisions that matter. Now, in comparison with the number of chapters devoted to the whole story of Joseph, the Noah story is only 4 of the first 9 chapters in the Bible. And those first 5 chapters, as you remember, cover creation, the appearance of humanity on the scene, original sin, and the dispersion of human life over the earth. And although we don't seem to have many living room conversations these days about original sin, we will have to touch on it this morning, because they are important in setting up the placement of the Noah story in the creation account. Now, comparative anthropology suggests that every indigenous culture has its own creation stories. And the unfolding creation story in the Bible is filled at every pause with this one refrain: it is good. The scriptures capture the wellspring of awe and wonder and reverence for life that percolate through our collective history, no matter how brutal and unjust some others of us might be in the process. It is the constant counterpoint to the conquest cultures operating at any given time, at least since the domestication of horse and elephant. The pronouncement that life is good, here and now, and not in some future time, is particularly strong in the evolving Judeo-Christian tradition, even when that tradition promulgates heinous crimes against humanity. And it distinguishes itself from many other creation stories by this affirmation, by its focus on the here and now, by its declaration that that reverence for life matters absolutely, and how we become fully human. Many of us might even be able to share personal stories of that special, quite mystical, youthful, existential experience when we just get it. I am me. I'm nobody else. I am me, and I matter, and I have a meaning and purpose in this extraordinary, beautiful world I find myself in. Those moments that do matter in the shaping of our own sense of self and calling. We notice early in the creation chapters, as we do in much of the Bible, that there are layers of ancient tradition woven together imperfectly, not well synchronized. The most troublesome, of course, is the story chosen to raise the issue and the problem of human sin, the problem of evil. The first early and oft-repeated misunderstanding of these stories in subsequent history is the reading of dominion as domination, which in turn led to missing stewardship, deciding that humankind was not part of creation, but was superior to it, and was given liberty without limit in its regard. And the second profound misunderstanding, better stated as subversion of the creation story, was the attribution of evil as caused by women. Now, later traditions have made an effort to correct these stories. The simple refrain, "it is good," appears many times, and it gives witness to the experience that reverence for life, to the beauty and awe and wonder of being in the world, is still part of every human experience. But one voice in particular, one that is too little heard today with the passages of time, is that of the great Albert Schweitzer, who spoke in his life choices as well as in his words. Here are a few, as simple as they are inclusive. Ethics is nothing more than reverence for life. Reverence for life is the source of all ethics. If a man loses his reverence for life, he will lose his reverence for all life. Lose any part, and you lose it all. Compassion, in which all ethics must take root, can only attain to its full breadth and depth if it embraces all living creatures and does not limit itself to humankind. Original sin is the loss of reverence for life. That loss of reverence for life happens at all is a function of the fact that we are human. We have free will. We have the ability to learn. And the ability to learn is in the ability to draw distinctions. This is an apple tree, that is a pear tree. This is a storm cloud, that is a fair weather cloud. This ability is the basis of all knowledge, and it's the basis of all science. The problem arises when human beings arbitrarily assign values to the distinctions they draw. And perhaps the root distinction or discrimination is that between self and other, between self-regarding behavior and other-regarding behavior. When we value self more than other, we have violated the law or the principle or the truth of the importance and centrality of reverence for life, as well as we have violated the biblical imperatives to love neighbor, the least of those among us, strangers and enemies, as we love ourselves and as we love God. The original sin of humanity, mirrored in the scripture story, is that distinction drawn between male and female, and the subsequent disvaluing of women. The layer of tradition that gave birth to the story of Adam and Eve was perhaps chosen precisely by the early editors because it reflected the culture they lived in and benefited from. But we also know that the original loss of reverence for life and the original sin of humanity is the disvaluing of women, because we see it all over the globe to the present day. It is empirically obvious. This original sin is visible in the second-class status, in the property status, in the unequal treatment of, in the domination and oppression of, and the abuse, rape, and murder of women on every continent and every society. Who can calculate the suffering and cost of this sin? That loss of reverence for life, that human ability to draw distinctions and to value one higher than another in a zero-sum judgment, is also at the root of America's original sin. The judgment beginning with the Puritans and their encounter with Native Americans, that color and otherness were legitimate bases for negative judgments of value. And we must not forget that we are descendants, as Congregationalists and as Americans, of that Puritan experience. And we must not forget that in 1637, they decided, as a matter of policy, to exterminate the Pequot tribe. Now, the phrase matter of policy is a phrase that has unique and long-standing political and theological bases in the West to legitimate the use of otherwise immoral and unethical actions when they are directed against enemies, or as we say in the present era, when they are in our national interests. Such actions are, however, always a violation of the creation spirituality of reverence for life. The Puritans determined that as a matter of policy, it was all right to lure the Pequots into a pleasant, formal conversation, to put them at their ease, all the while they were planning something else. And shortly after that subterfuge, the Puritans from 3 villages in what are now part of Massachusetts and Connecticut gathered in the middle of the night, in the middle of deep winter, circled the Pequot village, lit one of their dwelling places on fire, and in that hideous light proceeded to slaughter every man, woman, and child. Meanwhile, the non-Puritan English in Jamestown had been doing essentially the same thing, violating the laws of indentured servitude of Englishmen, killing and removing native populations, and were building an economy based on exploitation that was moving inexorably and quickly toward a full investment in slavery as the basis of their economy. Now, revisiting the issue of sin as loss of reverence for life, uncomfortable as it might be, and as abstract as it might seem, is crucial to grasping in spiritual life something of our human story and our ability to justify the things we do. But he also provides a basis for understanding the placement of the Noah story, where it is located. The Noah story becomes an illustration and a symbol of the ancient understanding that not only do humans sin, but also that human sin is punished by God. But the story also forecasts new understanding. Humankind may still have hearts inclined to evil, but God will not punish, says the last few sentences, all life because of human sin, but will work in other ways to change the human heart. Restoration of reverence for life is essential to human wholeness, and human wholeness is essential to the possibility, to fulfilling the possibilities of all life. And the story also suggests that we must be broad enough in our understanding to recognize that Negative human impact on the environment is directly related to the Noah story. The Noah story suggests that a notable destructive environmental event occurred, and it was recognized by storytellers as having to do with human activity, a judgment informed by observation. Now we also know that the ancient layers that make up the early story in Scripture disclose profound conflicts in the evolution of human cultures. That hunter-gatherers were hard-pressed by herdsmen, and herdsmen hard-pressed by agriculturalists, and agriculturalists hard-pressed by the development of cities and commercial societies. It is easy to read in the scriptural stories themselves that each evolution was met both with resistance and with strong negative judgments of one culture by the other. And we also know that as humans first left Africa, they settled in the Fertile Crescent, in the region that would, some 100,000 plus years later, become known as Mesopotamia, and in the adjacent areas of what is now Europe, Asia, Arabia, and North Africa. And much of the detail of how human life evolved is still unknown. But we do know that the earliest civilizations that did come to flower did so only 6,000 to 8,000 years ago. And that the first opportunity for oral traditions to get put into writing happened at that time. In addition to Albert Schweitzer's name, there is another name from the 19th century that is little known today, but very important. It is that of George Putnam Marsh. George Putnam Marsh was born in Vermont in 1801, lived through the first 3/4 of that century, and he was described by contemporaries as having one of the more capacious minds of anyone known in that day. His personal library had more than 12,000 volumes, and he reportedly spoke 20 languages. And like many of his contemporaries, he was an astute observer of the impact of felling trees and clearing and farming land on the climate and in the environment, all in the name of progress and the old adage that taming the wilderness is good and demonstrates the dominion of man. But Marsh and other observers like Thoreau and Wilson Flagg and Susan Fenimore Cooper noted the rise in temperature levels, the reduced rainfall, the impact on soil erosion, the lowering of groundwater levels, and the decline of quality in the woodlots they allowed to grow back. Educated at Dartmouth, practicing lawyer, a businessman involved in the expanding lumbering business across this country, Marsh was already turning the long-held sentiment of the value of leveling forests on its head. Already he was arguing that deforestation meant alteration of entire ecosystems, and that deforestation risked permanently degrading the land beyond any capability of nature to ameliorate the damage. But at this early stage, in 1847, he still sublimated his clear findings and held on to the argument that humanity was superior to nature and not a part of nature. But of particular importance to this development in his thinking were two diplomatic turns he spent in first Turkey and then Greece, using that opportunity to travel over the whole of the Middle East and to see what ancient cultures had done to their land as compared to America's new and so little as yet destroyed environment. The ancient treeless landscapes of Europe and lifeless deserts of Egypt and Arabia struck him as a result of centuries of unchecked deforestation. He went back to Europe and the Middle East in 1861 when Abraham Lincoln appointed him ambassador to Italy. By this time, his original intent in writing his book, Man and Nature, was to demonstrate that whereas many think that the earth made man, that man was making the earth. He proposed to show how the so-called civilizing effects of humankind had in fact transformed all the inhabited regions of the world. The first issue of Man and Nature came out in May 1864, the year of the Battle of Gettysburg, a period of time at the end of that devastating, disastrous Civil War when forests were used to set them on fire, to affect what forces on the other side were doing. In this work, he shows no patience for the status quo idea that forests existed to be exploited by humanity. Man alone, Marsh wrote, is to be regarded as essentially a destructive force and power. The destructive agency of man becomes more and more energetic as he advances in civilization. All the vast evidence his research and travel accumulated led Marsh to one inevitable conclusion. With the disappearance of the forest, all is changed, and the earth is rendered no longer fit for human habitation. In the 163 years since the release of the first edition of his book, great advances in understanding the complexity and importance of ecosystems and of the biosphere itself have evolved. And substantial research has gone into uncovering the successes and failures of human interaction with the environment. That humans have consistently made continued human life in specific regions impossible, one region after another, is well documented. Ancient Mesa Verde, contemporary Haiti, and modern Montana are on that list of collapsed societies because of the lack of regard for reverencing the environments we live in. We do know the details of the specific environmental human disaster. We do not know the particular details of the behind the environmental disaster that is given witness to in the Noah story. But after the release of Marsh's book and the subsequent researches that have been done, it is far more reasonable to assume that there was one, and that the story passed on to us is a magnificent human attempt to make sense out of it and to provide hope and guidance for the future by framing the covenant of the rainbow sign and reasserting the goodness of life in those words that God pronounced after he experienced the odor of Noah's sacrifice and said simply, I will no longer destroy all life because of the evil of human life. Inviting us all, people in that tradition, to renew our commitments to love the creation and to do so by loving everything in the creation. But most of all, the authors of that story have bequeathed us a far more important symbolic image than just the rainbow. They gave us the astounding vision of an ark sufficient to bear all life. For certain it is that this rare planet, among the billions and billions of planets and the billions and billions of galaxies, each is the only one which we know, and more important, the only one to which we have recourse and access is this ark we call Earth. Now we are at a point where the wanton divide, the human divide between exploiting it for the profit of a few and reverencing and restoring it for the life of the many, is critically posed for us. The biosphere is particularly at risk and already is incapable of sustaining and feeding those hundreds of thousands who are starving on every continent on the planet. Because humans are part of creation. If we are not part of the solution, we are part of the problem. It's easy to make the abstract judgment. We could. There is enough food, but there is not the ability, because war and other political divides and other moral and ethical divides keep us from developing the will to do so. In addition to that, we cannot meet the suffering of the hundreds of thousands, now millions, of refugees who are wandering without hope on all the continents of this earth, seeking asylum and safety and food and the possibility of life. If our collective loss of reverence for life does not alter, does not transform, does not experience renewal, does not recognize the extremity to which we have come, then this blue boat home we occupy will become increasingly more inhabitable by not only the larger mammals, but by humans. And sustaining human life will lessen. The degradation of the planet will increase beyond the capacity of nature to ameliorate it. Like Nineveh, prophets have arisen in our society and in our midst to come and tell us in holy and resolute ways that we have lost our way and there is little way forward and less time to make a difference than we think. The fate of this little human project hangs in the balance, and its future is not guaranteed. The ancient Noah story only declares that not all life will be destroyed by humanity's destructiveness, by the collapse of the human experiment. Not all life, but certainly human life is not guaranteed forever on this earth.